Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here, and today we're going to take a look at Element 3D version 1.5. So this is our new update with some great new features, and instead of just writing out a big list, I thought I would show you what the features are and how to use them. So, drum roll. Wait a second. Has anyone ever used a Casio keyboard, the drum roll on that thing? Horrible. Let's go and skip that and jump right into the features. So the number one new feature, in my opinion, is animated OBJ sequences. So what this means is you can now import your animated 3D sequence. So for example, we've got this bird that's animated, and it can be exported and imported into Element 3D, complete with animation. So let's take a look at what that might look like. All right, so this is a pretty crude example. Looks like some video game cutscene, but what's cool is we've got a soldier here that's running, and he's just in this little run cycle that loops perfectly. So we can actually zoom out here. Maybe I'll shut the depth of field off while we check this out. All right, so we've got this animated OBJ, and it's working just like any other particle object, except it happens to be animated. So there's a lot of amazing things you can do with an animated sequence, especially one that loops. So let me show you how this is set up. What I'm going to do is create a new solid, and we'll call this Element 3D, hit OK. And we'll just put this down here in place of our other element layer and shut that off. So we'll click on it, and we're going to add our element plugin. So we'll come over here to the effects element and drop it onto our solid. So we'll go into the scene setup, and most everything is pretty much the same, except now under File, we have a new option called Import 3D Sequence. So what I can do is navigate to an OBJ sequence, select it, and open it, and now you can see it's actually imported 15 frames of that animation. And we can also see it's got a different icon than normal single objects. And we have a couple of new baked animation options. We've got the start frame, the end frame, and a frame offset, as well as the playback speed. So let me go ahead and set up the material really quick. So we'll come in here and just throw a texture on here. It's super basic. Now we can actually scrub through the offset to kind of see the animation moving a little bit. But we'll just go ahead and leave that at 0 and hit OK. All right, so now we've got a single guy here running, and we can look at this animation looping. Zoom in here. And so that's pretty cool. But what else could we do with this? So let's go over to Group, and let's go to Particle Replicator, and let's replicate our SWAT guy on a plane. So we'll click Plane, and we'll turn up the particle count. And maybe turn up the scale shape. And so now we've got a few soldiers here running. So, we can create our perfect stormtroopers from the Clone Wars. And these guys are all running perfectly. But what about the ability to randomize that or control that? Well, we've built it in. So if you go to the particle look, we can go down to baked animation. And here we'll find some very powerful options. So first thing, we have a loop mode set to loop. So basically this animation is automatically going to loop over time, 1 OBJ per frame. So we can actually change that to random loop. So now every soldier will pick a different point in time and loop as well. So that's pretty cool. Or we could leave it at loop and instead come down to frame offset random, this second one here, and set that to say 3. So that way the guys will run very, very close to perfect, but a few guys will be slightly off. So you can see, right here as we increase that, they'll slightly go out of sync. Obviously, if you're working on a clone army, there's going to be slight differences and variations in the DNA, and there's nothing you can do about it. Let's see, go back to 0 here. Now remember, we still have access to all of our other options. So size random, we can still tweak that and create some very interesting size variations. Again, I would be less concerned about the clones being small than I would be about the fact that there's actually small soldier uniforms that they've created. That just seems like a lot of work. But, just a slight variation. You got guys that are 6'1", 6'2", and, All right, let's go and turn on the depth of field, and we'll zoom back in here. And so animated OBJs really opens up a lot of new possibilities. So especially people who work with 3D programs and want to be able to take advantage of Element with some of their animated things, they can export an OBJ sequence and import it. Now, keep in mind, you want to try to keep your loops or your animations, as short as possible, especially if you have a low-end GPU, because when you import a lot of animated OBJs, they have to be stored on the graphics card, and they can use up a lot of space. I thought of an analogy, actually, as far as understanding your GPU and GPU memory. It's kind of like a glass of water, and you can only put so much water in there before it overflows and spills out. So if you have a smaller glass of water, you can't fit as much. So if you have like a 512 card, just think in terms of, not making your scenes too complex, and, just experiment to find out where that balance is. Let's get back to some more exciting features. So we've got another example here with a flock of birds, and this was pretty much the same method. We've got the birds flying here, and maybe the SWAT guys turned into birds, and now they're flying, so that's cool. That makes for a great movie. They actually kind of look like vampire bats. That makes for an even better movie. You get that younger demographic. Okay, so same idea here. We've got the bird animation here. So we've got this cool bird, and it's 240 frames, but I've actually limited it to 40 frames because it loops at the 40 frame spot, so that way I don't have to use as many of those frames. But that's pretty cool. Let's take a look at some of the settings. I've also animated the position of the group so it looks like they're flying forward, and I've turned up the scatter amount to kind of just mix them up. I've exported some other animations from 3ds Max. So we've got this cloth simulation. No, it wasn't simulated in Element, but the fact that you can bring it in here and get some really good speeds is a very cool thing. So one of the options for the particle in the baked animation is the ability to freeze at the end. So it can animate and then it'll just stop when the animation is done. So that's cool because you may want the end frame to hold, for the rest of your animation or whatnot. And you can also animate the playback speed. So you could actually animate to a point and then keyframe the playback speed down to 0, and that will basically freeze it on that frame. So you can see, here we go, it's animating and then it just stops, and then of course you can start playing that again. So that's a really powerful way to control your animation, more precisely. And another example here, I've exported a dice simulation. So let's see here. Just some dice that basically, roll down using a rigid body simulation. So this was done also in 3D Max, but using some objects from the Casino pack, I just created a short little animation here. The dice drop in. We've got a little bit of depth of field. We're rendering it here on the fly. And snake eyes. Even in my own animations, I fail in life. Now, here's another simulation that was exported out of 3ds Max. It's basically a box falling and crashing. But what I've done here is I've randomized it so that they just keep falling out of the sky. Let me show you how I set this up. So let's just go ahead, delete element here, and drop it in there. Go into the scene setup, import 3D sequence, and let's go over here to crash and crash OBJ, and we'll open that up. So I'm going to set the anchor point to from model, and that way it's a little bit lower, and we'll hit OK. So here we just have it falling down, right? And it's looping. Well, let's go into the options here, baked animation, and let's set it to freeze at end. So that way it just goes and stops, right? But instead of one particle, let's make a plane, and let's make 10 particles. And we'll turn up the scale shape. There we go. So now we've got these blocks falling perfectly, but they're pretty uniform. You know, if we do 9, there we go. It's pretty uniform. How can we randomize this? Well, let's go to the particle look and let's randomize the rotation. Let's go to the rotation random and turn it up. And maybe the size random as well, so we can tweak that a bit. So now things are going to be falling and they look a little bit different, not quite as uniform. But the other thing I can do is randomize when these pieces fall down. So if we go to the particle look, we can go to the baked animation and check this out. We're going to turn the frame offset random up. So what that's going to do is offset when these fall down. So if we go to the beginning of the animation and bring the offset back, so this is the frame offset, so we're just shifting the animation forward and backwards in time. But we shift it back enough so that they're all at the top, and so now they're going to fall one at a time. All right, on to our next feature, real-time glow. Now, before, I've shown people ways where you can duplicate the layer and maybe output the illumination and then add a glow to that. And, you know, the problem is when you duplicate copies of element, it can start to slow things down. So we decided to implement glow directly into the render engine. So if we go to render settings, we have glow, and it's very easy to use. We just hit enable, and there we have it. We've got some nice glow. This particular one is emitting from our windows. So this is emitting only from the illumination, but we can also change that to luminance and it'll glow from everything. And of course we have some threshold options to keep that under control. But let me show you a couple of the other features of the glow. So one thing we have here is just a couple of different quality options. We have low and high. Low is just going to be a little bit more fast on low-end cards depending on the complexity, and high is going to be nice and smooth. So if we increase the radius here, create a nice soft glow, the problem is we lose that really hot spot around the glow area. So we've implemented a feature called highlights, and this allows you to glow specifically from the bright areas. So it's sort of like a secondary glow that just adds a little bit more realism. And let's see, we can, soften that up. So really cool looking. We can also control things like saturation and even tint the glow. So we can create some really cool looks here. Another cool feature is chromatic diffractions. It's similar to chromatic aberration, but let's take a look at that. So we've got another project called diffraction. So we've got just some glow coming off this, and you can see the nice rainbow colors that come from this highlight. So check this out. We'll go down here to the glow options, chromatic diffraction. So what's going to happen is you're going to have your glow, and that looks nice. But if you turn up the intensity of the diffraction, it'll begin to bleed in some color. So if we shrink the radius, we'll be able to see this a little bit more clearly. We have things like spread and softness. And again, this is all based on your threshold, so you can increase or decrease that. And this particular one is based on luminance. So you can see, this is pretty cool, and it's very fast to be able to work into your animations where needed. And you can increase the glow radius, and then you may want to increase the intensity and spread of the diffraction. So pretty cool. And then maybe even crank up the saturation if you want to make that a lot more visible. I don't know why you would. Come on, people, let's be subtle about this. All right, just a little bit more. Okay, very good, very good. Who am I to talk about subtle, right? I say add some more lens flares, and it looks great. And again, we've got another example here. We've got the glow coming off of the vehicle here, and all the same controls. Now on to the next feature. We've got the custom anchor point control. So a lot of people will be excited about this. Basically, if you click on your object, we can show this grid, which will show you where the anchor point is. So it may kind of look like a bug, but this X or this cross is going to render on top of your image, and the grid is going to render through your image. So the grid's getting cut off by the car, but you can see this cross is on top. And that's to help you find the cross point with your model. So what you can do is you can adjust the anchor point using some presets. So in this case, we can do, say, bottom, and that'll put it right at the bottom of the vehicle. And then we can actually adjust the anchor offset. So we can shift this and, precisely, line this up with specific parts of your object. So this is cool to be able to, put the anchor point exactly where you need it to be, depending on where you want the rotation point to be. So now that we've adjusted the anchor, if I go into the group for the particle and rotate it, it's going to rotate around that point. So that is how you can adjust the anchor point for your objects. Now, another cool feature we have in the render settings for fog, we turn that on, we have another option called taper. So instead of fogging off into the distance, what taper will actually do, and let's see, we can turn the range down to, say, 50, it creates sort of a scan of your 3D object. So this is very cool because, it saves you the trouble of having to, export a ZPass and do this manually. It can be fun, let's say we're doing a wireframe render and, we want to do some cool high-tech scan. We can animate this start distance. So simple little feature, but definitely some fun opportunities there. So I'm going to shut that off, back to normal. More features. So let's come back over here to ambient occlusion weighting. So this is another cool feature. So if you've ever wanted to use ambient occlusion to kind of fake a little bit of shading underneath an object, just to go over this really quick, sometimes we like to use a primitive of a plane on group 2, and so it's right underneath the car here, and then we can go into the scene setup, and if we click on that material, we can set it to matte shadow, and so it disappears. And if we turn on ambient occlusion here, it will actually, cast a little bit of shading on that surface. So it's a cool little feature, but the problem is, if we crank this up too much, it starts making our object a little bit muddy, and it's not always ideal. So what we've implemented is the ability to control how much intensity the ambient occlusion takes on. So in the case of the vehicle, we want the vehicle to remain default, but on the ground, we want it to be, say, 4 times as dark as normal ambient occlusion. So if we hit OK, and we can turn the intensity down here. So here we only have to turn it up a little bit, and yet we're adding a lot of darkness to the bottom without affecting our vehicle too much. So this is kind of an ideal situation if you want to control the intensity of the ambient occlusion on specific objects. So anyone who knows what I'm talking about will know what I'm talking about. And also really quick, I just remembered there's also an option to control the glow amount. So if you have certain objects that you don't want to glow as much, like say you have a diamond ring and you only want the diamond to be really bright and glow, well, you can turn the glow amount up or turn the glow amount down, and that object won't be affected by the glow. Now, another really cool feature that's more of a workflow feature is the render mode. So currently it's set to full render, and what that's going to do is render all of the settings at whatever you have them set to. So early on, we implemented a feature called super sampling. And what that does is renders your image twice as large in order to avoid, flickering or small edges, in the OpenGL renderer. So you might turn super sampling up to 2 to smooth out, a sharp edge. So you can see right here, it's a little blocky. We set that to 2 and smooths it out a bit. But it also slows things down. So usually what you'll do is you'll turn it down low while you're working, and then when it's time to render, you can crank that back up. So instead of having to worry about going and turning all those things back on and off, we've implemented a new render mode option. So how this works is you can turn your settings up ready for render. And then while you're working, you can change the render mode to preview. And this speeds things up quite a bit. And then when you're ready to render, you can simply turn it back to full render and you're ready to go. Now, another option we have is draft, which does change the shader quite a bit, but this is going to be extremely fast, which is great for your camera movements and just refining things where you want to get a lot of fast feedback. So preview is great for working, and then when you're ready to render, just switch it over to full render and you're good to go. Now, another small feature that we got a lot of requests for is an opacity per group. So if you go into the particle look, we have a force opacity that you can turn down and basically fade out entire groups, and hopefully that just helps out a few people. We also added a few new UI options. So if you go into the scene setup, there's a couple of new functions. So let's say we look at our materials and we want to solo a material. Well, usually you have to shut them all off except for one, but we implemented a new feature. If you hold down Alt while you turn off one of the switches, it will solo that layer. So this can be good for, grabbing specific parts of your model, or even just trying to figure out what's what. So you can just click and see that that's the front left tire. And if you alt click it shuts it off, do it again, it turns it back on. So that's pretty handy. Another one if you're switching between groups, so especially with our new Metropolitan pack, there are, a ton of different buildings and things, and you want to switch them to specific groups. If you hold down Alt while you click on a group, it'll switch it to that group instead of toggling it. So right now, you click on a group and then you unclick another group. So if you hold down Alt, it'll just swap it. And one other one, if you turn on automatically normalize scale, if you turn that off, models that get added to the scene will not have the normalize scale option on. So if we just click on one here, that'll be shut off when you load it. We've also made it a little bit more controllable in the UI, so you can move things a lot more and you can zoom in a little bit more as well. If you hold down Shift as you get closer to zooming in, it'll zoom in a little bit slower. So zoom normal and then slow zoom. So that's handy. And then also plus and minus on the keyboard will zoom in for people with tablets and things. Another really cool feature is the layer grid mode. So what this mode does is allows you to use a layer to generate the particles, but instead of them being random, they're actually aligned to a grid. So up here we can change the amount of particles per X and per Y, and create some really cool looks that way. So you can imagine all the fun you're going to have. And the way it works is you just choose the layer grid mode as the replicator shape, and then you choose a layer, and then you just change the particle count. Now, here's another important feature for people who do 3D text extrusion or shape extrusions that have run into any kind of errors with fonts. What we're going to do is load up some text, go into the scene setup and hit extrude. And so we've got our title here, and sometimes you can start to see some weird looking spikes or things like that. Usually it's a font issue, but we've added some options to control that. So in the extrusion model over here, we have an option called spike filter. And if you turn that up, it will eliminate some of those spiking issues and make things a lot nicer. Now let me talk about a couple of these other features. One, we have separate objects. So if you're using the multi-object output and you want each character to animate independently, you can turn that on or keep that turned on. But you can also have bounding box or geometry. So sometimes if two letters are really close together, they'll show up as one object in the multi-object. But if you set this to by geometry, it'll make sure that each piece is a separate object. So this way it just happens to be a little bit faster. And also we have the auto preset scale. So sometimes if you swap out text a lot, and depending on how long your text is, your bevel size is going to change pretty dramatically. Well, if you turn off auto preset scale and set your set your bevel up, it'll actually maintain a more consistent bevel even if you swap the text out. And then we have the fix holes option, which let's say you do an object with a hole in it and the geometry isn't being created in that hole. Just turn on fix holes and that'll recreate that geometry. Just some cool tech fixes for the extrusion engine. Another cool feature is the new particle ordering and repeating options. Let's go into our scene setup, and from our sports collection, I'm going to add a few different balls. So we're just going to add a baseball and a football and maybe a helmet and a soccer ball. So these are all on group 1. And the baseball should probably be a little bit smaller, so I'm going to set its scale down to 50%. And I'm going to hit OK. Then I'm going to set the replicator to a ring and turn up the particle count. I'm going to turn up this scale shape so we can see this a little bit. And maybe turn the particle size down a little bit. So the question is, what order are these particles in? Well, we added an option for the particle order. So by default, it's set to random. But we can also change it to forward, which will loop them sequentially. So if we go into the scene setup really quick, we can look at our objects. So we've got our soccer ball, helmet, football. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different objects. Now, if I set our particle count to 15, we should basically see 3 revolutions. So we've got a football helmet here, football helmet here, football helmet here. So this is a cool feature because now we can control the way things repeat. So if we go into the scene setup one more time, we can actually move the objects around in the list. So if I put the football in between the helmet and the soccer ball by moving it up, you can see that it highlights where it's going. Now when I hit OK, the football is going to be between the helmet and the soccer ball. So that's not all. There's a couple of other cool things. We have a particle repeat. So if we set that to say 2, all of the objects are going to repeat 2 times. So 2 soccer balls, 2 footballs. Now, in order to get an exact replication, we need to have enough particles to do that. So this can be a really cool feature for refining what your particles look like and what order they show up in. Another great thing about this feature is if you have a specific amount of objects you want to show and you don't want any of them to repeat, so in the case of the football or whatever, if we set this to 5 objects, we're only going to see those 5 objects. So there's never going to be any inadvertent repeating. All right, thank you guys for checking out this video. Really appreciate it. Hopefully you guys are digging the new features. And as always, we really appreciate the community, helping us build this product, develop it, and to all those people who have supported it and use it, thank you. And just keep sending us that feedback. We're going to just try to keep improving it as much as we can. So be sure to check out the Metropolitan Pack of city buildings and skyscrapers. This is just one of the more structured buildings that you're able to create. And check out the promo video. There's going to be a lot of cool things demoed of what you can create. And it was all created inside of After Effects using Element 3D. My name is Andrew Kramer, and we We'll see you next time.